today, I believe still, that is the largest congregation of followers in the world. But after studying the Lotus Sutra, he decided that all of Buddha's teachings were found in the Lotus Sutra. And in fact, that branch of Buddhism studies only the Lotus Sutra. It is also Nichiren who created the Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, sorry for my pronunciation, which is expounding the idea that we all have in us what we need to transform suffering. Also, you might have heard of Hakuin, who is an 18th century Japanese priest and founder of the Rinzai tradition, which uses koans. And it's really a beautiful story that Hakuin, after reading and studying the Lotus Sutra, had the realization that everything up to that moment for him had been practicing only for himself, and it changed him greatly. The Lotus Sutra is studied and focused on in nunneries and monasteries throughout the world. And in fact, it influenced evidently the first Japanese constitution and greatly influenced art and literature, especially in Japan and China and Korea. So Lotus Sutra for us in the Mahayana tradition is a seminal text. It's a very important text and an integral part of reforms that took place in Buddhism centuries ago, eventually leading to Mahayana today. And I want to give you a little bit of history. So during the Buddha's life, over 2,500 years ago, Buddhism was basically pretty unified and pretty cohesive. There was one Sutra collection, teachings, and there was one Vinaya collection, which are the rules for monasteries and procedures. And this period of time is often considered or referred to as original Buddhism. And about 150 years after the Buddha's death, so fourth century before the Common Era, we entered what is called schools Buddhism, which is a period of time when there were many different schools, up to, Jean Reeves says, maybe 25 or more different schools. But two of those stood out. Two of those were most prominent. One was the Theravadan school, the Way of the Elders, a very traditional monastic tradition that is still practiced all over Southeast Asia today. And there was a focus on personal enlightenment, and really just for a focused defined group, which were scholarly monks called arhats. And then there was the Mahasangika Vada, which is the way of the majority, which later became Mahayana. And those who were followers of Mahayana at that time had the very strong belief that the monastic institution was really very disengaged from society and was not and could not meet the needs of lay people and lay practitioners. So it was out of this great concern for this rather insular nature of monastic Buddhism that Mahayana started emerging as a unified, cohesive organization with the Lotus Sutra at its heart. And these were teachings that emphasized that everyone, even non-human beings, have Buddha nature. And we're all becoming enlightened together. And no one is left out and no one is separate. Very important. So by around the second century of the Common Era, the Lotus Sutra was starting to be put into writing, because prior to that, it was mostly just, it was entirely oral form, being passed on from disciple to so on and so forth. But by this time, the second century of the Common Era, Mahayana had actually become an established community with a fourfold Sangha. Everyone, nuns, monks, lay women, lay men, all following what the Buddha calls one great vehicle, one great path. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that later. So the Lotus Sutra, in my opinion, is beautiful, but it's a descriptive spiritual text that was written in prose and verse. And it's a compilation of, most people agree, 28 chapters. There might be a few more in some versions of Buddhist teachings and many stories and parables, all that he taught in order to help us on this path to awakening. And the Lotus Sutra is a text that has influenced many lives of people who have read it and heard it. And in fact, it can and it does transform lives. So let me set the scene for you a little bit. Chapter 1 is an introduction, and it takes place the scene is that the Buddha is sitting on an actual physical, geographic, historical place in Northeast India that exists today. He's at Holy Eagle Peak, often called, also referred to as Vulture Peak. And according to Jean Reeves, who has visited Holy Eagle Peak, it is about 2/3 up the way of a very rugged, steep mountain. It's a ledge that would comfortably fit a little over 36 people. So this is where the Buddha taught the stories we're going to be looking at of the Lotus Sutra. And he was surrounded by disciples, and he was surrounded by family. So the nun Mahaprajapati was there, was his aunt and his stepmother, and in my opinion, really his mother, because she started taking care of him when his mother died, I think 5 days after he was born. And the nun Yashodhara, which was his wife and the mother of his child, and his child Rahula was there. And there were a lot more people, as we're going to see. But the Lotus Sutra itself actually starts with a sentence from Ananda, who is the Buddha's disciple, and you might say attendant. And we are very beholden to Ananda, because Ananda is very well known for having memorized all the Buddhist sutras, all of his sermons rather. So they were passed on word for word, evidently, from Ananda. So in the Lotus Sutra, page 1 begins with Ananda saying, "This is what I heard." Or you might hear that as, "Thus I have heard." And the reason that's significant is because it's actually saying that Ananda is saying, these are words that came directly from the Buddha's mouth. And so it starts with that. This is what I heard. And then it goes on to say this. At one time, the Buddha was staying at Rajagriha on Holy Eagle Peak with a large group of great monks, 12,000 in all. In addition, there were 2,000 others, some in training and some no longer in training. The nun Mahaprajapati was there with 6,000 followers, and the nun Yashodhara, the mother of Rahula, with her followers. There were 80,000 bodhisattvas. They included Manjushri Bodhisattva, the regarder of the cries of the world Bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, Medicine King Bodhisattva, Maitreya Bodhisattva, in all 80,000. Also there at the time were Indra, king of the gods, with his following of 20,000 children of heaven. And then there's another 10,000 children and another 100,000 people, and so on and so forth. So in this great congregation, there were monks and nuns, laymen and laywomen, gods, dragons, satyrs, centaurs, pythons, humans, non-humans, as well as all kinds of kings. And it was a big group. It was a huge group. And there were all beings there, even non-humans, across time and space, really. And all of them could receive these teachings. So then the Buddha preached, all these people around him preached a sutra called the Innumerable Means. You might know that as also as Immeasurable Means. And then he went into a very deep meditation. And two very significant things happened. You might consider them kind of omens. Maybe to prepare this group of people for what was coming, which was the teachings of the Lotus Sutra. So first, out of the sky rained these rare, beautiful flowers that just covered the entire assembly. And the Lotus Sutra says the earth trembled and shook in 6 ways. And all of them were just astonished, and they weren't quite sure what was coming, but they had great joy. They put their hand palms together, looked up at the Buddha, and just waited for his teaching. But then another thing happened that was very significant, and that is from the middle, in between the Buddha's eyebrows, from a white tuft of hair, came this beam of light that, quote, illuminated 18,000 worlds to the east. And at that moment, everybody assembled could see these worlds in just vivid detail, including all living beings and past and present Buddhas. So this is a moment when it seems that time and space are suspended and extended at the same time. Vital connection to the vast cosmos. And to me, it feels enchanted. It feels magical, and in a way, it is. There's every kind of being there, including non-humans. They're all showing this great respect and joy for the Buddha, and they're all able to receive these wonderful teachings. And it includes the magic and enchantment of this very world in which we live. And it's important to remember that in the midst of this rather fantastical scene, the Buddha is sitting on a physical ledge. You can visit there in the presence of his family. And it seems to me that it's notable of reminding us of his humanness and of ours, but also his connection to all time and all space, and ours too. So the Lotus Sutra is really rich in details, and it does emphasize this cosmic nature of the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings, but it is absolutely anchored in this world, this mundane yet fantastical world that is our ordinary world. So then the Buddha begins to teach the Lotus Sutra. And there are, in these 28 chapters, some fundamental teachings. And I just want to mention some of those now. First, and very importantly, he teaches what is called the one vehicle, which vehicle meaning path or approach. This one vehicle that is like an umbrella that includes all other vehicles and all other paths. It's that great to include everything. And he specifically talks about what was existent at the time that I was referring to earlier, that we had the path of what were called the Shravakas, these scholarly monks who were pursuing awakening in monasteries. He was referring to the Pratyeka Buddhas who pursued awakening by and of themselves. And then he was also referring to the Bodhisattvas who were and are awakening through interaction with all things and all others in this world. And Mary Allen's going to talk more about that. This all happens in chapter 3 in the parable of the burning house. And she'll give you a lot more detail about that. He also emphasizes what is called skillful means. And we see examples of people, beings using skillful means throughout chapters 2 through 14, although you can find it throughout the Lotus Sutra. But skillful means is not really, it's not a goal, it's a means that we can use in our lives and for how we behave, how we act. And to be skillful, the Buddha talks about the fact that, okay, our actions should be appropriate for ourselves and our abilities and our understanding. It should be appropriate to the people involved, and it should be appropriate to the situation we're in. Also, skillful means should be skillful. So when we are in a situation, being flexible and dealing with what's really needed at the moment, what the people of the situation might need in the situation itself. So it's kind of like maybe thinking outside the box. And skillful means need to be effective. They need to work. So it seems to me that we are always being asked to use our imaginations and be creative and to see new possibilities in the way we approach our lives and approach others. And we're reminded a lot in the Lotus Sutra stories that, failure is an option. And we see it throughout the Lotus Sutra. We see in chapter 4, the rich father and the poor son, the son who has left his home and is really struggling in life, and the father using all kinds of different ways through other people, trying to get his son to come back so that he can help him, using skillful means, finally having a good result. So we see those kinds of stories throughout the Lotus Sutra. Another really important aspect of the Buddhist teaching is this notion of universal Buddha nature, that all of us, no exceptions, you and me, have the capacity to be Buddhas, have the capacity to be enlightened and transform suffering. And I wanted to read you, just to kind of still give you just a little flavor of the Lotus Sutra. This is Burton Watson's Lotus Sutra, which includes all of the texts. And let me see where we're at. And so this is the Buddha talking to Shariputra. And he says, Shariputra, you should know that at the start I took a vow, hoping to make all persons equal to me, without any distinction between us. And what I long ago hoped for has now been fulfilled. So this notion of everybody, the Buddha and all of us have the capacity to be Buddhas. He also talks about his many lives, if you will, his cosmic presence. This is the Buddha everlasting, if you will. His many emanations and embodiments of Buddha throughout time and beyond. And he even says that his life 2,500 years ago on this earth was actually just skillful means. He created himself. He created Shakyamuni to come to this earth to teach us and help us. So, this is a really important text and has a lot of implications to obviously Mahayana today. So the first time I read our book, the stories of the Lotus Sutra by Jane Reeves, it was actually summer of 2019, because we were going to be having our practice period actually in the fall of 2019. So I was going to start reading it, and I took it outside. I was at my cabin in the mountains and sat down in this lovely wooden chair that my grandfather built in the 1960s, and surrounded by this beautiful place and this 300-foot cedars and firs and pines. And I sat down and I started reading the text we're using. And it was not too long before I was pretty filled up with what were very familiar sensations and feelings. It was the same thing I felt the first time I walked into a Buddhist temple. It happened to be in Thailand. And I walked in, kind of shuffled in and settled down on the floor, put my palms together, looked up and saw this radiant, beautiful Buddha, and was just absorbing this deep resonance of the monks chanting. It was like that. It was like the first time when I opened up a book a friend had given me, a book about Buddhism, and I opened up to the first page of the first chapter and I read the Four Noble Truths. And it was as if it just settled into me in one foul swoop. And at the same time, I was going, oh my gosh, it's kind of like getting the answer to the, what is the meaning of life? And I then broke out laughing and ended up sitting finally in just this state of a of a huge smile on my face that just would not go away. And in fact, it hurt. It was so broad. And it was like that to me. And from the first moment, Buddhism, the Dharma, the Buddha, has always been for me heart, body, and mind together. And this is what I feel about this. There is great joy and compassion and love and wisdom in me when I'm reading it, but also it's in the Lotus Sutra all over. It's great joy. And, you might not feel any of that. This text might not motivate any of that in you. And that's perfectly okay, obviously. It's perfectly okay. And, it is called the Lotus Sutra. So there's all this beautiful symbolism of the lotus flower, but, you can't forget the mud, and there's plenty of mud. And we are the mud. And Reeves says that, quoting him here, he says, the Lotus Sutra comes with a warning, dangerous to your comfort. And I totally agree with that. And I actually hope that for you too. So, putting the teachings to good use also includes kind of holding our own feet to the fire, looking closely at ourselves, opening to them in that way so that maybe they speak to us, and maybe they don't. But I think we'll probably all agree, I think, that all these stories point to possibilities. And, after reading these stories, I feel like, well, for example, the chapter 25 is about Kuan Yin, Avalokiteshvara, the regarder or hearer of the cries of the world. And after I've read that and I've studied it a bit, it doesn't seem possible for me that I can't consider that, listening and hearing others, the suffering of others, or not just the suffering. And how can I not hear my own cries too? There's a story called A Fantastic Castle City. There's a group of people who want to be led to this rare treasure, and they have a guide with them. And so they're going along this rather arduous route, and they eventually become very tired, and they don't want to. They just say, "Oh, forget it. This is not worth it. It's too much, too hard, too long." And this is a very skillful guide, and he's able to create the illusion of this fantastic castle city. So he says, "Look, right there," kind of like a mirage, right there. Just keep going. We'll get there, and you can rest, and everything will be okay. And they agree, and they continue, and they arrive at the fantastic castle city. And then he says, after they've had time to rest up, he says, he gets rid of the illusion. He says, "Now, let's continue this journey." So, this also reminds me, by the way, that in the stories of Lotus Sutra, there are stories within stories within stories, or maybe commentaries within commentaries within commentaries. But this illusion that we might think we've arrived somewhere, and that's where we are. That is where we are, but that's not where we have to stay. There's always a place to go. Keep going. And then, Baika, I think you're here, but this one, I'm thinking of you about this because one of my favorite stories here is chapter 21, Never Disrespectful Buddha, Bodhisattva. And this is a fellow that, Bodhisattva, that walks through life saying to everyone he meets, "I would never disrespect you because you are all bodhisattvas on the way to becoming Buddhas." And people treated him horribly. They threw things at him, they called him names, but he remained humble, resilient, embodying the Buddha. And I feel like that reminds us that what we do and how we do it matters. It matters not only for our lives, but collectively for all of us. And it matters too in relation to the degree the work of the Buddha is getting done in this world. Because the Buddha continues to walk this earth through us. He continues his work through us. We are his eyes, his ears, his hands, his feet, his heart, right now, in every moment. And I feel that if we open our hearts and our minds and our bodies, the Lotus Sutra, the stories of Lotus Sutra are likely to touch us. And just maybe in a way we most need at this very moment. So I'd like to end with Burton Watson again. And this is actually at the end of the parable of the medicinal herbs, which Jean Reeves calls the parable of plants. And this is the Buddha speaking. Now for you and the others, I preach the utmost truth. None in the multitude of voice hearers has entered the stage of extinction. What you are practicing is the Bodhisattva way. And as you gradually advance in practice and learning, you are all certain to attain Buddhahood. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Patty, for your talk. How do you feel?
I feel relieved